I'm Josh Cooperman with Convo by Design. This is WestEdge Wednesday, all of the programs from the 2024 WestEdge Design Fair. This year, the theater was presented by Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company. So thankful for them. Designed by Julie Beuerlein of JKB Home Design. This next program that you're going to see, this was fun, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Is it really worth saving? Iconic architecture or an old but poor representation? This topic is being discussed in every city around the country. Should we save it? Is it worth it? Who's to decide, right? So this conversation was moderated by yours truly, featuring Jaime Rummerfield of Jaime Rummerfield Interior Design, Chris Goddard of the Goddard Design Group, Anthony Laney of Laney LA, Paul McClean of McClean Design, and William Hefner of Studio William Hefner. I loved moderating this, and I hope you enjoy watching it. It was fun. Thank you very much to Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, for presenting the theater here at WestEdge this year. And thank you to Julie Beuerlein, who designed this space. And I've said this before, but to think of having conversations about amazing architecture and design on a stage with black AstroTurf in front of a white tent wall it'd be awful. So I'm very thankful to her that we have this living room that we can have our little conversation in. It's a little more cozy, exactly. A couple of housekeeping, not really housekeeping, but announcements. So Paul and William were gracious enough to bring out their new books, which we have right here, by the way. And after the program, there is going to be a table set up on the other side of this wall where they're going to be doing a book signing. Each of them are going to be signing their respective books. So please be aware of that. Don't worry, I'll remind you at the end. But I wanted you to be aware of that, and we're doing that right after. So what do you think? Did I cover everything? All right. Thanks for coming. We'll see you guys next time. This program that we're talking about today, some have said that before every panel talk, I say how great it's going to be and how excited I am. And I do say that, it's true. But I don't know that I've ever had the weight of, I got heavy hitters on stage today. I got heavy hitters, and I love that. You have all done such extraordinary work, and we've had conversations about them before. And one of the things that we had each spoken about is this idea that you have creatives and creative individuals who put out such amazing work. And then you have a case where Jaime and I, with 1001 North Roxbury, where we did a program, someone comes in and spends, they have more dollars and cents, and they spend all this money on a property simply to tear it down. So we started talking, and we're going to be talking about iconic architecture and the nature of iconic architecture and what makes something iconic, or something maybe by a great creative but isn't necessarily worth saving. So we're going to get into that. Before I do, I'm going to go this way, and I would love for you to introduce yourselves. Jaime?
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Jaime Rummerfield. I'm a co-founder of Save Iconic Architecture, the nonprofit organization that brings awareness to historic preservation. And I am also the principal of Jaime Rummerfield Interior Design.
Hello, I'm Chris Goddard from Goddard Design Group. We're based in Northwest Arkansas, and we kind of do residential, commercial, and a little bit of everything.
My name is Anthony Laney. I am the founder of Laney LA. We are a boutique architecture studio in Hermosa Beach, California, and we specialize in designing homes.
My name is Paul McClean, founder of McClean Design, and like Andrew, we specialize in contemporary homes, and we're based in Orange County, California.
Mine works. I'm William Hefner. I'm an architect here in Los Angeles. I have an office in Santa Barbara, and I specialize in doing custom homes, landscape, architecture, and interior design.
So here's the hope. Here's what I'd love to do. This is more discussion than Q&A. And I want to sort of launch into this with two examples. And I mean, we could talk about Gardens of Allah, we could talk about Pick Fair, we could talk about the Brown Derby. We could have these conversations, but two in particular that I want to just use as flashpoints to start this. One is 1001 North Roxbury. The other is Chris Pratt and Catherine Schwarzenegger with the, see, I want to say...
Craig Elwood.
I know, exactly, right? Yeah.
Read your mind.
And these are two relatively recent incidents, both very different, but similar in nature. So I want to go around the horn one more time, and I want to get your ideas on what makes architecture iconic. Is it the architect or builder or designer? Is it the neighborhood in which it resides? Is it the social value that happened in and around that particular property? Is there something else? In your opinion, what makes architecture iconic?
In my opinion, architecture is iconic notably based on, one, the architect, because it is architecture. Architecture is also art in some people's eyes. And when you have a notable or legendary, even there are architects titled master architects, that is important to take note that these exist and have to have a value put on that level of architecture. And I think to the everyday person, when you look at a house in a row and you don't know the difference, that's an issue right there that we have in our city, in Los Angeles, is the education in architecture and design is not in the general public. And so it's important to put a spotlight on that and bring awareness to that. And then also, yes, cultural heritage, cultural resource, maybe who did live there or what happened there, is also notable when it comes to historic and iconic architecture.
I think when we talk about design, it gets a little confusing because no two people like the same thing, so it's hard to get anybody to agree on what's iconic. So I think for something to become iconic, a group of people all have to agree that this is special or means something, which is really hard, and that very seldom or very rarely happens in the design world. So when we're talking about these important properties around the world, it's a group of people or a mass of people that all agree that this is important historically, architecturally. I'm an interior designer, or from a design point. So I think what makes it iconic is that a mass or a group of people all agree that this is an important piece of work, because design is subjective, and that would be kind of my view on that.
You've got a great voice. When I think about the word icon, it comes from the Greek word ikon. It means image or representation. And originally that was used in a religious sense. It means like image bearer, or it could be some sort of representation that was almost sacred, right? And so I think the bar for iconic architecture is actually very high. It has to represent something incredibly special, hard to replace, has deep cultural value. I think that very few things meet that standard, in my opinion, but I think it's wonderful that we're having this conversation about that.
I couldn't agree with you guys more, but I would also add in, just from my own personal experience, the idea of context. So it's easier in an urban sense to think about that buildings can sometimes be part of an urban fabric, and that's not necessarily what we find here as much in our city. But I grew up in Ireland, and we have a beautiful Georgian city that people destroyed because they thought that buildings would be unsafe or not suitable to maintain. And we were lucky enough to do a project recently in San Francisco, which was one of the few houses that predates the earthquake by 3 years, and it had survived the earthquake. It did not survive the Army and Navy after the war came back, so the interior had been like stripped. But we felt it was really important to hang on to that project because of the context of where it was in Pacific Heights and how it added value to that neighborhood. So that's just like a nuance on what you're all saying, you know, that it's not just, is it of iconic value because of the building itself, but what is it contributing to its neighborhood around it? There are many neighborhoods here, like where you work so much in Hancock Park, which, you know, it's the total sum of all the buildings is just as important as the individual.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I'll just add on to that, I think. Yeah, but I think that we're the fabric of the neighborhood. They speak of things being contributing members to that fabric or that neighborhood, where something can be architecturally not necessarily significant, but that it's part of that fabric and it's sympathetic to it and it contributes is important. For me, the iconic category I think of as being something that encompasses a piece of work that encompasses sort of the highlights or the sort of known quantities and stylistically of a well-known architect, right? It's a Paul Williams house. Well, it's got this thing, or it's Wallace Neff. It's got his proportion things. It's got this window relations and the type of detail. And to me, that makes things iconic. But I do agree things become, that it has to do with the setting and the time. I think those also contribute to sort of iconic status, as do just the culture of it, what was happening, who lived there. All these things start to figure into it. And I think they all are part of that package. So.
I believe that anyone in or adjacent to our industry has the passion for design and architecture and loves what we do. And I think it's surprising to me when you have structures that are so representative in a community and then they're endangered. You have parts of the community who are up in arms and they're upset, and then you have people who just don't really seem to care much. I'll give you an example, and it's happening right now, and that is Price Tower in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So I live in Tulsa, and last year I went out and I toured Price Tower. For those not familiar, Frank Lloyd Wright's one and only completed skyscraper. 20-story, beautiful building in the middle of Bartlesville, Oklahoma, which, by the way, it's a very sweet place, but it's exactly the type of city that it sounds like to you. And there's nothing else around it that is even remotely resemblant of what it is, or what, if Frank Lloyd Wright, middle of Oklahoma, a 20s. So a couple of years ago, it had not fared well, as most Frank Lloyd Wright projects do, and that's something I want your take on too, because it doesn't fare well. But it was sold for $10 and a commitment for $10 million to restore it. Can you restore a 20-story skyscraper for $10 million? No, you can't. So what they did was they started selling off artifacts. You'll find them on First Dibs. If you go, you'll find them. Original. My point is, as creatives, if you do something like that and someone comes in and your work is bastardized, it's taken apart, it's sold off, how does that affect you? I'm just curious, from a creator's perspective, and Paul, I'm going to start with you on this one. How does it affect you when, do you envision something when you make it like this has the potential to be iconic in the future, or this is a representation of my work, and then when there's the threat, how do you feel about that, and how does that affect you as you envision your legacy?
That's a tough question. I mean, first of all, I don't really think of it being iconic. I mean, I'm trying to solve problems as I go, and hopefully maybe one day someone will like one of these houses, or one of my kids will insist that someone hang on to it. I think when I think about projects, though, I really do focus on, I'm an architect, obviously, and so I'm thinking about architecture. I'm talking about the relationship of light and space. So I can see where houses can kind of wear different dresses over time, and you hope that really when it moves on to new owner, you'll get a chance to talk to them, converse, and help them understand what we were trying to achieve. But my hope is that, because we keep making all the regulations so strict now, that these houses that we're all building right now might stand the test of time, simply because, well, you can't build them anymore in those lots. So people will hopefully hang on to them. And I think beyond the iconic part, there's an intrinsic value in just like not taking down structures if possible, because I think we have to really seriously consider that because of the environmental impact of demolishing things. I mean, although I spend my life designing new houses, you really have to think and weigh carefully if you want to get involved in a project. If there was something of intrinsic value on a lot, I'd rather keep it, and try and work with it as much as possible, versus just like, oh, there's another site, let's just tear it down, do something new. We just have to assess, there's a lot of not great buildings And we have to acknowledge that, you know, and that doesn't mean that our buildings are really that great, but we can try at least.
Jaime, what does it take for you and Ron to get up in arms about a project? When do you get upset, and how do you prioritize?
Well, as an interior designer, being in the field often and seeing glorious estates throughout Beverly Hills, Bel Air, throughout Los Angeles, and really a history buff in my own right, I love seeing the vernacular of Los Angeles through different eras. And that's the beauty of the city, is it has so many moments. And even though it's a short history of time, we have world-class architecture and creativity that really defines our city. And so going on a job walk and in Bel Air and seeing a glorious, very old Hollywood estate, and I was so excited to do the project, and the first thing the client said is, we're gonna tear this down. We wanna build a Zen garden here and put this, you know, something very different. And I couldn't help myself but just say, you can't tear this down. This is too glorious of an old Bel Air estate, just this colonial style, old Hollywood, just grandeur. And so we didn't work together, but at that moment I thought, who can I call? Is there a design police? Is there, to stop this? Like, what do you have to do? And I realized, talking to the LA Conservancy, to the city of Los Angeles, is wow, there really was no recourse in even flagging these type of homes to point out that this is special, and this is a Paul Williams over here, and this is a Wallace Neff, and they are special. And in the city of Los Angeles, we do not have anything flagged like that as far as a preservation program goes. And I was shocked to know that. Our Office of Historic Resources downtown has 2 employees, and they're basically in a reactive mode when I thought, oh, these are just naturally, someone's protecting these. So when you see a Paul Williams or a Richard Neutra, they're most likely not landmarked, which is shocking. And so we realized, wow, this first has to change, but also let's start putting a spotlight on this topic.
William, when you think about this topic, and I'm going to go back to the same question I asked Paul about, and by the way, well, let me ask you this. Is there anything wrong with calling your work iconic? I mean, think about this. As a creative, if you went to Picasso and you said, is your work iconic? He would say, yeah, it's iconic. Of course it is. Many artists would be that way. But for some reason, architects, designers, not so much the same. Why is that?
Oh, I see. I think Frank Lloyd Wright wouldn't have had a problem with it either. Yeah, it depends on the size of your ego, maybe, right? I think. But I don't know. I think it's hard. It's hard to have perspective on your own work. I think that to anything you do, you know, sometimes somebody looks at it and they see something in it that you may have thought, but you think it's great that somebody gets it. But I think you don't. Like Paul said, you're sort of heads in the work. You feel like you're solving problems. You're trying to do it in an artistic way, and sometimes you're so close to it, you kind of have no idea. I think that's the excuse for that. Right?
Because you're a nice person.
Yeah, okay, so maybe. But I do think I have a couple clients that have houses of ours that they feel that way about. And when I look at it, stand back from it, yeah, it does have kind of all these elements, and it's a good house. And, you know, at some point, your work gets defined by a certain aesthetic, and I think it's that aesthetic, if it's good, that over time people appreciate, and it becomes iconic. I don't think it's iconic day one. I think iconic has to stand the test of time. You know, it's like 10, 20, 30, 40 years out. And we try to avoid trendy moves. We try to do, at least my practice, we really try to concentrate on things that are enduring and will create long-term value that way. But I don't know, sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not, right? It's like,
No, that's so true. Anthony, you have chosen probably one of the highest density areas in which to work, which is one of the reasons why I admire the work that you do so much. And I always come back to this, and I'm sorry, but it's kind of like, oh, you want a pool, but you don't have the size for the pool and the house? We'll just build it so that it disappears. Okay, thank you, Anthony. But because of that, how does that relationship with the city and preservation and the nature, and I go into this specifically because knowing how specifically Manhattan Beach is, as far as we want to save the nature of a small town community, of which I would argue that the architecture is part of that. But then you have people coming in because as prices go up, there's this push-pull, and I think that's where the problem comes from. How do you navigate that, and how do you have these conversations at the same time with clients who just want to spend the money? They put the money down. Where are the property owner's rights in this as well?
Well, I think there's a process of natural selection, even in art and architecture. And if we're invited to give a proposal on a project, we're going to visit the site. And most of the time, we agree with the premise of the owner. But often, every now and then, they will plan to tear it down, and we will need to help them see a vision for how a significant part of the home can be preserved, whether in structure or sometimes just in narrative and spirit. But other times, it is trashy architecture that even though it is wasteful to remove, it creates such a low bar for redevelopment that we do tear it down and build it new. So Josh, you're referring to the fact that most of our homes are in the city of Manhattan Beach, and these are 30 by 90 little shoebox sections, and it's easy to remove and easy to build back. Our goal is to create something that of its own merit would stand the test of time. So I think that's where there's an alignment of our own ambition and the desire to create something that actually lasts. 1/3 of our projects include renovations because we are arguing that there's true creative merit or structural integrity to be preserved. But 2/3 of the project do include, I'm not proud of this, but do include raising the property, going way up and way underground simply because the property values are so high, and that is the right of the private property owner. It's very different in Manhattan Beach than in Hancock Park. It's the Wild West in a sense, in that there's no governing agency that limits their creativity, and that's a good thing and a bad thing in my opinion.
But if I could just add to that, we did a project 20 years ago on Laguna Beach where we used to do a lot of work, and they have a pretty intense design review process, but it leads to this conversation. There was a project we were looking at, and I took the board out there because they were talking about this shack, okay? And the shack was from 1910, but that was it. It was from 1910. Like, it was literally falling down, and there was nothing of value there. And the argument I made, which was successful, we had the same problem as you, Anthony, that we had to get more space because of the value. It was oceanfront. But the argument is this has no real iconic value or historical value. What it is vernacular. And that even though we normally do very contemporary homes, if we were willing to work within the vernacular style of the neighborhood, they were willing to let us take it away because we'd put something back that would contribute at that level, as opposed to if we tried to do a very contemporary home there, which they weren't really willing to do. So I think it's important to think about what is vernacular and how does it contribute to community, and maybe there's more flexibility there. And then you have certain things like you were talking about, Jamie, that are really of intrinsic historical value, which we have to figure out a way to keep.
And conversely to that, so Chris, if you're in Arkansas, do you ever have conversations about preservation and restoration?
I come from a little different world than y'all do, which is I'm brought in after the property's purchased, so I have to salvage the interior of the house from 30 to 50 years of trends and bad taste. And if it was built in the 50s, it's been renovated in the 70s, 90s, early 2000s. So, you've got everything covering up all the original work. And I'm really fortunate that where I live, we have a huge protege of Frank Lloyd Wright, Fay Jones, and that's mainly we're on our 9th restoration of a Fay Jones house right now, which is really amazing. But if you look back over time, because the way they lived in the 70s and 60s and when these homes were built was so different that the interiors have pretty much been raped, and they are, filled with overstuffed, awful furniture. And my job is to come in and educate them and say, hey, this is what the house looked like. What drew you to this property? Was it the look, the feel, the energy? Do you want to spend the money to take it back to its original form, but make it more comfortable where we use the same? Because Faye, much like Frank, designed all the furniture for the homes. So we think about, how do you want to live in the space? Do you want it to be true to form? Do you want it to be more contemporary? Because a lot of my clients, and much like y'all's, if you're doing a historical property, they're like, I bought it, I can do anything I want. And my argument with that is, well, why did you buy it? Something drew you to this beautiful piece of property. So let's educate ourselves. Let's take a step back and let's look look at where the house came from. Do we want to take it back there, but in a more modern way? So most of my job when I attack these projects is education, because people are drawn to this property, and it's usually emotion, because like my age client grew up in the era when these homes were popular. They're beautiful homes, and they don't know why they love it, but when they go in, they want that feeling, but they want it to be modernized. So from an interior point, I have to bring it back up to what it originally was, but make it comfortable and livable to today's standards, because we live so differently now than we did 30, 50, 60, 70 years ago. So when we approach those, that's kind of the way I look at it, is educating my client, which is the biggest part.
And it's interesting too, because you know what, like seriously, at the end of the day, who cares? I say that, no, Paul, seriously, here's the thing, and here's why I feel this way. I care, but as I said in the episode about 1001 North Roxbury, when it was demolished, I don't care. And let me explain why. I don't care because I didn't live there. I didn't live in the house. I didn't live down the street. I didn't walk my dog past the property. I don't have any stake in that particular neighborhood. But I feel, and I empathize, and I hurt for the community, because I recorded the commission hearing, the city council meeting. And I'm telling you, if you have a chance, go listen to this episode, because I heard a very well-paid attorney take down the city of Beverly Hills in 15 minutes. He demolished them. I don't know if you heard it or if you saw it, but he demolished them. In 15 minutes, he took every reason that they had for preservation, took them apart one by one, and at the end, the city council was drooling on themselves and babbling over themselves, and they had no recourse. I was stunned by that. They had no recourse. And the people who lived, you know, Lucille Ball on one side, Jack Benny on the other, Esther Williams swimming in the swimming pool. It was published in 2 magazines. It was beautiful. And it was demolished because a lawyer was able to take the city apart because someone came in who had more dollars and cents and wanted to own that particular piece of property. The fact that I don't care is immaterial. The people who live there, I would say that architecture is what makes a community. Community is what makes our society. It does matter. That's what I care about. So, listen, William, I want to start with you, and then I want to go back around, and I kind of want you each to chime in on, you have Hancock Park on one side, which in my opinion does a magnificent job. I could be wrong, but I think they do a very good job. And then you have a city like Beverly Hills that has all the resources in the world, who should be doing a good job, yet they don't. Why is that?
So, like over the years, I've renovated more than 20 houses in Hancock Park. And it's funny because in my office, I would get these projects, people would be like, we only should do new houses. And I said, no, you guys don't get it. Like, I think that it's important to do these houses and do them well, because you see them where they're not done well. And if you take them and adapt them to the way that we live now, or we want to live, and imagine the future, you can put them back together for another 60 or 80 years. And if you use compatible materials and details and things so it seems seamless and it's like was always supposed to be that way, it's great. But the reason that Hancock Park has sort of been preserved, a couple things. One is it was built in the early 20s, and it was built at a really high quality level. You go to those houses and, you know, they're not falling apart. You go and look at a 60s house, for the most part, you can push it over with your hand, right? And these houses are built and they've stood the test of time. And then the other thing is that the city, almost 20 years ago, instituted an HPOZ, which is Historic Preservation Overlay Zone, so that they require that initially nothing could change on the front facade of the house, and you could make revisions to the back or the sides. They've eventually made it to where the sides and the front have to remain intact, and you can do what you want in the back. And then they have a review board that reviews all your plans before you go into the city for your plan check and that. So they have an orderly process for it. And their goal is to have that neighborhood not change substantially from the street level and you see it, because it was done well and it hangs together. Beverly Hills has this kind of strange policy where they have a few architects on their master architect list, which are the Paul Williams and the Reginald Johnson and these people who did houses initially. They're on the list. So if a house is like that, it needs to be reviewed before it's thought about for demolition. You have to get a historic report and all that. But they also have a thing of, regardless of that list, if you post a sign out in front of your house for like 10 days that says you're applying for a demo permit, if no one raises a fuss with the city, they'll give you a demo permit. You know, it's crazy. It's a significant house. And so they don't. And it's a couple of very connected attorneys like Josh is talking about who are former mayors, and they're like so well connected to the system. They help sort of grease these things through. But yeah, they don't have the same kind of process.
A lot of those attorneys wrote the preservation program, so you could imagine all the loopholes that he utilized because that's who wrote it.
Yeah.
That's the problem to begin with.
Yeah, but City of LA has these in other places, like Little Ombi, and they're different neighborhoods. And the City of Beverly Hills is starting to do that in some of the multifamily areas where the old duplexes are and that. So I think there's progress that way, but it's different.
I think it's tough, right? Because the money is the biggest problem, and but I also think that people don't recognize things in the immediate history as having value so much, and that could be as far back as 100 years. And like you said, people are somewhat oblivious, so it works better if a community has a strong person that kind of pushes that through and then actually codifies it in some way. And I think for most people, if something is codified, so you're going to buy a house but it comes with all these restrictions on it, people understand that. People hate uncertainty. They need to just know what they can do, right? So if you have a situation like that, which many cities do, then it's likely that you'll be able to preserve things. But where we are, it's a bit of the Wild West, I think. But it's sad because we're going to not us, but in about 100 years, some people are going to wake up and say, wow, we lost that whole, we value things that are from 1890 and 1910 and maybe 1930, but then we don't value things from maybe 1960 as much, which are the things that are so iconic, using that word, to Los Angeles, and we're going to wake up sometime and realize they're all gone,
Yeah, it is tricky because time has to pass in order for us to come to a consensus about what is truly valuable. And I am grateful that Hancock Park has their requirements, and frankly, I'm grateful that Manhattan Beach doesn't. And I think different communities have different stock of architectural merit. And I think it's good to have a conversation about where is the bar and where is the time frame relative to what's worth preserving and what we can still improve on.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt if I can for a sec. But so one thing that I know of that's helped, if people want to know what they can do, is Curbed LA has, they're always checking for demo permits, who's applying for demolition permits in the city. And that, a lot of times they'll flag things and send them to the council office, but the local council office oftentimes has been responsible for saving pieces of architecture. A few of their constituents call and say, hey, they're applying for a demo permit for, house X, and this is an important house, and they'll the council office can put a hold on the demo permit until people look at it, but it's important. That's something that without orderly processes in certain neighborhoods, that saved buildings. So.
Kind of what I've found most interesting is this is my 38th year of doing design work and working around the country on different projects. And when I started, there was a group of people, and I think it's generational on what people find important in architecture and design, because my older clients, when I first started, it was a certain style of architecture. And then 10 to 15 years later, it was a different style. And now my clients are all into mid-century. So I think it fluctuates. And the problem with a lot of these architectural boards it's a lot of older people, and it's hard to get young, and I hate to use this word young people because I sound like my freaking grandmother, but getting younger people involved on these boards and getting them excited about architecture and design is really hard. And a lot of these boards are people in their 60s and 70s or 80s that have a lot of free time and want to control and micromanage and aren't current on what style, what's trending, what's important, because they're still stuck 30 to 40 years ago and what they think is important in design.
They still think tinned food is a good thing.
Yes, and it's a constant battle, in doing these projects and trying to get again, this horrible word, young people, engaged and excited and wanting to get involved on these committees and understanding the importance of what needs to be preserved and what's not. I mean, I think the word iconic is horribly overused, but I think, again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier, is just education and getting people engaged in this conversation like we're having today.
And I think, Josh, I'm going to disagree with you too, because when you say it doesn't affect you or you don't care because it's not affecting you or your neighborhood, this is Los Angeles, and this is why we're here. You would not even have Convo by design if we didn't have architecture that was notably recognized throughout our city, right? That we could talk about and be inspired by. And so with that, 1001 North Roxbury, it was special because it was a story. It was everyone's favorite house in Beverly Hills. And do you know the Preservation Commission in Beverly Hills? Do we know when this started? Does anyone know? It was 2012. They did not even have a preservation organization or commission until 2012. And those loose and wobbly laws that were written were just the first attempt in conservation preservation efforts. And yes, attorneys or anyone, they use that to their advantage all the time because these are such small commissions that have no funding and really don't have the support yet. But that's a good way to get involved, is to support our council members and the advocacy for preservation. It's such a small topic when it comes to civic tasks in our city. Same with City of Los Angeles. So same with Curbed LA and call to actions. We, with Save Iconic Architecture, when we hear of a demo of something important, we really bring awareness to it as well. And one example is Marilyn Monroe's house. And we saw that there was a demolition permit for it. And it is a historic resource. And not that it's the most iconic architecturally, but she is an icon. And this goes into cultural history of Hollywood. And we got inundated with people saying, please save Marilyn Monroe's house. And so that is the only thing you can do, is contact the mayor or that city's jurisdiction council member. And that was Tracy Park in Brentwood's jurisdiction. And we posted her phone number and her email address, is that if you want to save Marilyn Monroe's house, this is what you do. And it was just a call to action, but it really is, people don't know. And it went viral and global, and it was a big group effort with the Conservancy and many other coalitions. And her house was saved. Tracy Park stopped the demolition, and it saved her house. And we still have that cultural icon here today in Los Angeles. And we've done it. We saved the Standard Hotel building on Sunset Boulevard. There's a myriad of Neutras and Paul Williams that are the same, that probably wouldn't be here today because the dirt is more valuable than whatever is sitting on that. And that's what our challenge is here in the city. And even with the HPOZ, any HPOZ, which is Historic Preservation Overlay Zone, it's exterior only. The interiors are mostly gone. And to me, that's, as an interior designer, that's just as painful, because that's the space in which you live and experience the character and all the little details, the hardware, the lighting. It's all gone usually. So I think noting it does affect us all, and to care is important because it shapes us who we are as designers and creatives and architects, whether we know it or not.
And that is a great point. And I think saying one doesn't care is a bit provocative, fully intended. But I also had a conversation which has sort of informed the way I think about this, and I want your take on this too. When I spoke to Erin Elwood, Craig Elwood's daughter, when Chris Pratt and Katherine Schwarzenegger tore this thing down, you were there, you saw it, people got up in arms. So I reached out to her and I said, hey, can we talk? And we recorded an episode of the show, and she was like, look, it wasn't my dad's best work. It wasn't. Yes, it was a Craig Elwood, but it wasn't his best work. It wasn't that great. And if he was alive, he would probably tell you the same thing. And for me...
So let's just knock it down.
Huh?
So let's just knock it down?
No.
I disagree, so yeah, again.
No, and listen, by the way...
So there's good Picassos, bad Picassos.
I didn't plan
best
on the
work.
duel, but I'll accept it and go with it. I love that. That's why I love you, Jamie. I really do. I appreciate that. And I think, look, This is the importance. This is why we're having this conversation. This is the very reason why we're having the conversation. And I will just preface it. I can't preface it at this point, but I'll say, when Aaron said, you know, it's not my dad's best work, he would say the same thing. Then we get back to owners' rights and the value of community. And I think we have to be able to fairly step back and take our emotions out of it, because people got crazy over that. I mean, it made the news, it made everything.
It was negligence. The whole topic was sheer negligence. They didn't even know it was a Craig Elwood, sadly. So it's about information and education, I feel. So.
And I think that that what I think people are saying beyond it, something doesn't have to be iconic to be preserved. Like that's not, to me, that's not the bar to preserve something. There are lots of, you know, it can be really good architecture. It can be a nice piece by this architect. I think if you look at an architect's work over their lifetime, not every one of those works is iconic, but I think that still they're worthy of preservation. I think I told you when we spoke before, I had Charles Moore as a professor at UCLA when I went there. And he said, he was talking one day about Schindler, and somebody said, what do you like about Schindler so much? He said, he was inconsistent. And he said, and you know, it's this notion that not everybody does their best work on every day, right? But the fact that you can appreciate those aspects that are different or inconsistent about it. And so I think a lot of these things all contribute to understanding the work of that architect, and in that way, you know, they're unusual. Even sort of a quote unquote not as good Craig Elwood is still a Craig Elwood in thinking and the way it's done. So I think things don't have to be iconic to be worthy of preservation. So
This is going to get fun. I'm just telling you right now.
How much time do we have?
So-
do you have?
So
Craig Elwood story.
I want to hear your Craig Elwood story. Yes.
So a very serendipitous event happened. I got invited to go preview the Hunt House, which is a really famous Craig Elwood house in Malibu. And this couple had saved it from a developer who was going to tear it down and build, you know, one of those hideous McMansions in Malibu. And they spent 3 years putting it back exactly the way it was, to its original form, down to rewiring, replating all the plumbing. They even found all the original furniture because it had been warehoused, which I thought was fascinating, and had restored it to perfection, like you were walking into history. And you could actually feel the importance of the house and the architecture and the setting. And when they're telling you the story of this house, which this is a plug for my friend, but Peter Blake, who has this gallery in Laguna, for a month you can actually go see this house. And it's open. You can go to Eventbrite. Today is the first day. I got to go to the preview last night, and you can go on and buy, it's free, so you can get a ticket and go preview this fabulous piece of history in Malibu. I think it's running for like a month. But it's kind of a must-see to understand the importance of great design and great architecture, because it's 1,400 square feet, but it lives like 4,000 because of the light and space. It made me really appreciate the importance of his work. And when you were bringing up this topic, I thought, well, this is a really interesting time to do that. But to see that, it helps you understand, and not being a California native and not being super familiar with his work, I got it. I was like, okay, well, now I see what the uproar was, because it's something about it that everybody needs to experience. Because when you walk into this space, you're just transcended into another environment. It's just the way the rooms glow, the way the light is used, and you really appreciate the work and how important his work was.
Christopher Alexander calls that the quality without a name, right? I felt that recently when I visited Ray Cappy's house, and it just, I would traditionally be quite an advocate for private property rights, but feeling that home is just transformational. And I do think that, even though I'd argue the bar is high, there is a bar that we can fight for preservation.
So, Paul, should we have saved every one of Schindler's tract homes or Wallace Neff's bubble houses?
No, but I think, well, if I can go like 10,000 feet up, not being an American, there is a tension always in America between freedom. The word freedom is thrown around for everything. You need to be free to do everything. And property rights is a big one. And, you know, to kind of qualify that a little bit, like, you know, property rights are essential to a functioning society. I mean, at a very high level, societies around the world that don't function have very loose property rights. So I'm not denigrating property rights, but I do think there's an overemphasis sometimes on freedom, and we need a structure. You know, like we can't just hope that people will preserve things, or like you've been so successful, Jamie. This is fantastic, but at the same time, you're putting together these online, you know, petitions, essentially viral petitions to try and get things. That's not how it should be done. And we can all argue that having committees and so on is, you know, they could be taken over by all the wrong people and so on. But at least there's a format and a process. So I would be a very, very strong advocate of a citywide, you know, process to deal with this. And, you know, a lot of houses aren't worth keeping. Let's be honest. And even a lot of really famous architects' houses are not worth keeping, potentially. And there are other factors, but at least give people a chance to air that, and we may manage to save a few more.
Let that sink in for a minute, because I think your point is spot on. In a city where full of dingbats, I think every single dingbat ever built is still intact. I don't think a single one has ever been torn
Right,
out.
and we've lost pretty much everything else.
So what do you wish, I'm going to start with William, and I'm going to go this way, because I think this is where the rubber meets the road. What do you wish cities with significant, let's take the word iconic out for a minute, because I think it's like luxury, right? It's just one of those words. But with significant works by significant architects and designers, what do you wish that cities would do, municipalities would do, to at least establish a workable framework for saving properties worth saving? And how do you differentiate if you're those cities?
I think, like Paul suggested, the you know, having an orderly process for review that way. Like in Santa Barbara, projects that we do up in Santa Barbara County, you need anything that's 50 years old or older, you need a historic report about before you can tear it down. And that may not catch everything that we think is significant, but they do have that process. It's just, you know, you apply first for your first part of the planning, you put in your historic report about it. But something where somebody steps back and looks at it and says, okay, we'll give you the historic sign-up. We agree this is not significant, right? Very simple process, I think. And, you know, they can have a list of important architects if things are less than some threshold year-wise, but I just think having a process that's not discretionary in terms of, or not irregularly enforced, right? Because at the moment it's sort of random in the city of Los Angeles, in most neighborhoods, or Beverly Hills, as we said, and maybe other cities, but I think that's the most important thing, so.
Yeah, obviously I agree with William 100%. I think that's where you start. And it is a new city relatively, but if we all think, why does everyone want to go to Italy or Spain to see these beautiful old cities? Well, they were new once too, you know, but someone didn't knock them down, right? And this city is iconic in so many ways for so many people around the world. And, you know, much as I actually think Marilyn Monroe's house has no architectural intrinsic value, but for a lot of people, it has real value because she was there, and she is a real icon as opposed to a lot of the houses we're talking about, right? So that's part of our cultural fabric in this city that is what draws people here. And, you know, if we aren't careful, we will just lose it all. Like, there would be maybe a really big McMansion on that site, you know, and be like, oh yeah, Marilyn Monroe used to live there, and people will just keep driving, you know? So I think we have to really, I agree with William completely. We have to put some level of formality into this and realize that we are a grown-up city now. You know, it's not 1920 and people are just arriving on the trains to pick oranges or whatever they did back then, you know, or make movies. It's a real city of like essentially 20 million people in this greater Los Angeles, and we act like we're some kind of village, you know?
I had the opportunity to live in and care for the Gamble House in Pasadena, and it was really fun to be around the constant conversation on this topic. We couldn't install a stanchion, right? Of course, without it being reviewed by an academic board to make sure that it is in line with the existing character or the original character of the house. And often there are layers and layers that you have to peel back in order to get to what is the soul or the essence of where the value is. I really do like the rule because it feels like it can be fairly enforced around if it's 50 years old or some age old, that it at least requires review. But if it's younger than that, then in my opinion, the standards should be less strict, in my personal opinion.
And I find that people have got, a lot of this is based on emotion, I find. And in the world of social media and the digital age, early on when we were doing projects, nobody knew about it. Now I'll post that we're doing something and I will get 1,000 comments on how can you be doing this? What could you do to that? It was perfect. Why would you want to change? What are you doing to update? So I find it fascinating how interested people are and how passionate they get about an architect that they love. Like for when I'm doing a Fay Jones because he's from our area and the school's named after him, I mean, I just get hammered on what could you be doing? Why would you touch it? What could be wrong? What in the world? And again, it goes back to, I'm huge on let's educate everybody and bring in younger people to help make the decisions. It's kind of up to all of us and those of you interested in the room to get involved, because right now it's people, small groups of people in their 60s and 70s making these decisions, and they're not based on what's happening in the world today. So I mean, again, and it's a passion thing. I mean, we all have to be passionate about it. I think design evokes a lot of emotion.
Yeah, our Cultural Historic Commission is all, number one, they're volunteers of the city of LA, which I find odd, and they're all in their 60s, 70s, and almost behind closed doors, not out in the, don't see what's really the wide demolition of our city that's like rapidly happening. And so my wish is, and I, as an interior designer, I never dreamed I would spend so much time at City Hall and seeing and advocating for places that should be saved. And it works sometimes, and sometimes we've had horror stories where it did not work, but we tried. And my wish is that, yes, the legislation is there so that the preservation program is enacted. You know, Barbara Lowenthal did Santa Barbara's preservation program, and she went parcel by parcel, wrote every address down of most of the main streets, and documented the historic nature of Santa Barbara. And that is why it still looks the way it does today, because it probably would not look that way if it was just left uncovered in just the Wild West. And so Los Angeles deserves and needs the same thing, where there is a preservation, like a chief of preservation for the city of LA. We don't even have a city historian. And so just advocating for the support of historic LA and preserving LA. And that would be a coalition that would be built. And with Save Iconic Architecture, we're working on that, but we would welcome more minds and ideas to really put forth that plan to the city. We have Survey LA, which exists, and it documents our historic resources throughout the city. But that sits in the corner over here, and building and safety is over here, and they don't. It never kicks up historic potential property. There's no documentation that way when you're applying for a permit, and so for demo. And so if they could talk to each other, that would be a great next step. So that's what we're working on.
I'm just curious, and I'll just throw this out there as we wind this down. I'm just curious, since we've all been looking for a reason to make AI relevant in our own lives, do you think there is an opportunity to take a Save Iconic Architecture, to partner with the city of Los Angeles, who partners with the AIA, using AI, which takes away the excuse of having the bandwidth and the personnel to document every property, because it's already on the rolls. You know, it's already on the tax rolls. So you've already got dates and addresses, and in many cases, you've got creators and architects, because depending on years. So is there a value for something like that, and what do you think it would take to get a partnership with certain cities and private groups and groups like AIA to make that happen?
I'd love to know that. Please.
Well, in the past, it was we didn't have the tool to bind everything together, to activate it. But with AI, since, I mean, good Lord, we're all looking for a reason to make this thing we hear about every day relevant in our own lives, except for the fear of taking our jobs. So is that a thing?
You still need a creative mind to do AI.
The deal with the AI is it might, again, bring in a little bit younger generation that's passionate about technology and merge that with design. And I think that is a good way to get younger people involved in it because they're the ones who are way more in tune with AI than I am. We've tried it in the office and it's way over my head. It scares me. But I do think that it's a good way to engage people of, in college and younger designers and younger architects to get them involved.
It's a tough one.
It is a really tough one. I don't know that AI is really very useful for anything in the real world yet. Maybe it will be. I mean, maybe it can do. The problem is a lot of the information you'd be thinking is not digital, so it's not like the AI can go in there to City Hall and open the files and figure out which house was built in 1940 versus 1950. It's probably not much of a help at this stage, but I think the best thing we could all do if we wanted to try and promote it more and use the little audience that we all have here, to maybe do our little bit to push it, try and make it cool and trendy, and make people aware of their surroundings and maybe put a little pressure ourselves onto City Hall when we can. And, it is one thing that I don't think is particularly politically contentious on some levels at least, that we could go to anyone on any side of City Hall and say, like, we really want to keep a little bit more of LA. Most people are okay with that, so we can make it a non-politically dangerous topic maybe, or maybe the freedom rights people will be all over it, I don't know.
No, the city's very supportive. They're just like, can you raise money for this? And I find that shocking that come on, city, like LA deserves better. And as these discussions happen, we just keep losing more and more notable structures. So, and once those buildings are lost, the stories are gone forever as well. So it is a hot topic. Even in the last 10 years, we've lost a lot.
William, final thoughts? You get the final word.
I can't speak to AI too much because I kind of agree. A lot of this stuff isn't digital. Like, you want to find out the original architect on something. Sometimes you have to go through the microfiche to find the original building permit card, which is like all hand scribbled and that kind of thing. So it's hard to find. But I do think that, I encounter more people in the LA, and I think it just takes more of an outreach who, have bought a home. Like, we have some people we just started working with who have a Paul Williams Spanish house in Bel Air, right? They're so proud of this house, and I think that there's more publicity about old architecture, and I know some friends who bought a Schindler and this kind of thing. So it's like, these become sort of name brand things to people, which is good. And if more and more people appreciate that, they appreciate what they found, right? So if there's just more visibility. I know in the past, the LA Conservancy was pretty but pretty outspoken about a lot of things. I feel either I'm not tuned into their feed so much, I don't hear so much from them, but I think you just make it prestigious to own one of these houses. That's kind of what it is. Like you're saying, this one that you went into, it just had all the sparkle back and was beautiful. It just, more and more people need to aspire to do that. So, because I think it's a luxury to have that kind of timeless artifact, more than a sort of big new house, right? If we just kind of make that the status symbol, the new status symbol, right?
I think our problem in our city is that most of our heritage is residential, and it's behind gates and behind trees and so on. Like, if we're all driving sitting on a bus, going by it every day, we'd have a little more connection to it. So it's a little harder to get people off. But I think you're right. Your instinct is completely right. That's how you do it. You just got to get them out there.
And for those who are wondering, microfiche is something that you can find at the library. The old days, right? This was amazing. At the risk of sounding defensive, I really do care. because I love architecture, I love design, I love the stories behind architecture and design. I love what you do. And I think that that's extraordinary. I think that's why we're all here, right? Because we love what they do, and we love this industry. And this is one of what I hope are many conversations that lead to making our industry stronger and making it better. And with that, I cannot tell you how appreciative I am for you joining me on stage today to have this conversation. And I'm incredibly grateful that y'all took the time to come out. A few things, a few notes. First of all, please, I wanted to make sure that you had a chance. Our guests are going to stick around a little bit. So if you have questions, if you want to talk to them, if you have specific comments, something to share, please do. We'll be around for a while. William and Paul will be doing a book signing right out there around the corner. So they have books. They're going to be there signing them, so you can do that. Thank you to Pacific Sales, Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, for presenting the theater at WestEdge this year and allowing us to do this. Thank you to Julie Beuerlein for this amazing space. Thank you all for coming out. And again, grab a card, subscribe to the podcast so that you can listen to this again in January or February. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the show.